Hi everyone, I'm Hanovi Schoonover, the Training and Resource Coordinator for Retka Consulting, and I'd like to welcome you to the webinar. Before we begin, for those who may not know, Redmond is a nonprofit organization that provides tribal technical assistance on a variety of programs, including but not limited to housing and homeless services, children and youth, and elder abuse. This ranges from policy review via email to site visits. If you're interested, you can contact me at honovi@red-wind.net. That's hanovi@red-wind.net. As this states, this project is supported by grant number 2015 TAAX K069, which is awarded by the Office of Violence Against Women, U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. This webinar is a part of our Housing and Homeless Services project. And presenting with us today is LindaLee Retka. LindaLee is an enrolled member of the White Earth Band of the Minnesota Chippewa and is the National American Indian Housing Council's Program Director. She has more than 19 years of experience directly related to the management of all aspects of tribal housing programs. Her previous career positions with the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe included Grants Compliance Manager and Assistant Director of Housing. While employed with the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, she worked closely with the Eastern Woodlands Office of Native American Programs on several complex tribal housing issues, which now serve as models for Native urban housing development. Since joining NAIHC in 2010, her work is focused on providing strategic planning, program and policy analysis, technical assistance, and training services to Indian tribes, tribally designated housing entities, or TDHEs, and ONAP. She has specialized technical experience in the fields of housing, community development, and is an experienced facilitator, trainer, curriculum developer, and program evaluator. If you have any questions or comments, you can put them into the chat box and click on the hand icon, and we will get to it as soon as we are able to. And if you are having any issues with the presenter box being in the way of the slides, you are able to move that around. And I'll now turn it over to Linda.
Thank you, Anobi. Anin, welcome to Resilient Housing and Advocate Response Team's HART Housing Resources webinar. I am joining you today from my home in north central Minnesota on the current and ancestral homeland of the Ojibwe and Dakota. By working as allies, tribal advocates and tribal housing authorities can expand each other's capacity, increase survivor options, fill tribal housing gaps, and improve long-term outcomes. Each partner brings a certain skill set, knowledge base, and networking circle that can be beneficial for survivors who are participating in housing programs. This webinar will include guidance to start and sustain your housing partnerships with some tips for staying on track. If you are already involved in housing and advocate response team HART work, then this webinar will also provide an opportunity for a HART check-in. You'll be able to reflect on issues that may have come up and consider potential action steps to work through those issues. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Hanovi, please proceed to the next slide. I'll begin by telling you a little bit about National American Indian Housing Council, who we are and what we do. Our mission is to effectively promote and support American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians in their self-determined goal to provide culturally relevant and quality affordable housing for Native people. We were founded in 1974 as a 501c3 corporation. We have approximately 271 members representing 463 tribes. Our members are Indian Housing Block Grant recipients. Each tribe is eligible to receive an Indian Housing Block Grant, and it is up to the tribe whether the tribe receives the grant to provide affordable housing services for their community members, or if they decide to assign a tribally designated housing entity, referred to as a TDHE, then the TDHE manages the development, delivery, and management of affordable housing services within tribal communities. And the tribal communities include urban areas and off-reservation areas. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we proceed through the presentation. Our organization, as I am, guided by a 10-member board of directors representing the 9 geographical regions in the US. All of our directors are either a housing director or an executive director of a TDHE. We provide advocacy, training, on-site technical assistance, and research for the development and management of affordable housing opportunities throughout Indian country. Please proceed to the next slide, Novi. I want to start here with participant introductions. And it looks like we've only have 8 participants, and I don't know if that includes the presenters or not. Since we're a small group, I would like you to enter your name and organization in the chat box, but I'd also like you to, if you have a camera, please turn on your camera. And if you're open to introducing yourself, please turn on your microphone. Hanobi, are you able to allow participants to access their microphone so they can share information over the video?
Yes, I'm able to, though they won't be able to share their camera.
That's fine. If and so do you want them to raise their hand if they want to introduce themselves?
Yeah. So if you just click the little hand icon, we will be able to see that in the attendees list. And once we see that, we will allow you to talk.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. This is Wynette Tasker. I just wanted to say hello and thank you for joining the webinar today. I am Redwind's Housing and Homeless Services Technical Assistance Coordinator. So please reach out if you have questions after the webinar or at any time about any housing or shelter questions or issues that you're having. We're here to help, but thank you for being here.
Hi, Kaya. I see that Kaya with Redwind Consulting has joined us from Colorado Springs, Colorado. And so should be 2 additional participants. Christine Cooper, Miss Malka Fairbanks Native Association, Fairbanks, Alaska. Thank you for joining us, Christine. How's the weather in Alaska today? Getting cold. In Minnesota, we're about 70 degrees and sunny, and the trees are just starting to change color. Welcome and thank you for joining. 33 degrees. Oh my, okay. It's really cold today. Well, with that, Hanobi, please proceed to the next slide. On the top of your screen, please click on View Options. For those of you that are on a laptop or an iPad are able to do this, please participate. And Christine, I think you'll notice that I have a map here that does show Alaska larger than most maps that we've used or that I've seen other presenters use, and I wanted to do that. I work very closely with Colleen Dushkin and a couple other folks from the Alaska area. And one comment that they always make is that, you know, they never show really the size of Alaska in presentations, and people don't understand how large we are and how many tribes we have. And I know that that's more than, well, I'm not even going to guess how many, but I know it's a couple of hundred tribes in Alaska. So thank you for joining us again. And please, on the top of your screen, click on View Options, look for a little pencil that says Annotate. Click on that and then click on the stamp button, pick a shape, and click on where your program operates. Okay, so I know that we have folks from Alaska, Colorado. I am in my home office from Minnesota, but we provide services on a national level. We will proceed to the next slide, Novi, please. So since we're having, let's try this one. I've got poll in Mentimeter. And so if you're able to, if you have a laptop or an iPhone, please go to mentimeter.com and enter the QR code, or use the link www.menti.com that's shown on the screen, and go to Mentimeter and answer the 2 questions. If you have a phone and you have the slide on your screen, if you take a picture of the QR code, that should take you right to Mentimeter. Okay, we've got one person that has 0 to 1 year experience. And I have, as mentioned earlier, over 20 years experience. I'm now the elder. When I joined Indian Housing, I felt like I was one of the young ones joining Indian Housing. And now I'm in that position of being an elder and enjoying every minute of it and learning something new every day by working with different people throughout the nation. Okay, we'll go to the next question is, and if you do not have access to Mentimeter, please enter your answer in the chat box. Okay, the next question is, sorry, I need to advance my slide here too. What do you want to learn about tribal housing? Oh, we've got some good questions here. And we're going to attempt to answer these during the webinar. Give you about 2 more seconds. We have the 2 questions that are here right now are, what do housing authorities expect when working with advocates? And what do housing, oh, somebody entered that twice. So what do housing authorities expect when working with advocates? That's a very good question. And I work with several housing authorities and also tribal housing departments, and also, you know, with my experience working at Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, worked in the tribal housing department, and we knew very little about advocacy programs, and that really, I think that we need to learn more, and I have been learning for the past 18 years. I have been involved in learning about permanent supportive housing, different advocacy programs, and am very thankful for the relationship that NEIHC is developing with Redwind, because this is giving us an opportunity to learn more about advocacy and what the needs are. So the tribal housing programs and advocates serve the same community members. And it's very important for us to communicate expectations. And I think that is really something that is developed in the first conversation. And so when you ask, what do housing authorities expect when working with advocates? Initially, I don't think they have any expectations, because they're interested in developing relationships to bring additional services and assist their tenants, community members in obtaining housing, securing housing, and also in developing or living healthy lifestyles that are healthy for their families, for the community. And so the expectations would be basically that we need to work together. And when we're developing HART teams, you would outline expectations, but these are all going to take several discussions with the housing authority, the advocates, and any other service providers within the community. Thank you for that question. Very good question. I'll close out the Menti slides here, and we'll move to the next slide. So a significant resource that the tribal housing programs have to develop affordable housing and manage affordable housing programs is the Nahasda Indian Housing Block Grant. Each tribe is eligible to receive an Indian Housing Block Grant. And as I mentioned before, either the tribe receives that and has a housing department that manages the grant, or designates a tribally designated housing entity that will then manage the grant. This funding is allocated by a formula throughout the country based on the needs within the tribal community and existing housing stock. And the existing housing stock that's considered is the old 1937 Housing Act stock that many of us refer to as low rent or mutual help. If you live in a tribal community, I'm sure that you have heard of the low rent or mutual help programs. But in addition to managing the low rent mutual help programs, with the Indian Housing Block Grant, tribes have the opportunity to budget that funding to meet the needs of community members, not only in managing existing housing units, but actually in administration, in planning, in conducting needs assessments, in developing housing, managing housing, in operations and maintenance of other types of housing, crime prevention activities, services. In this slide, I've included just a couple of services: tenant-based rental assistance, training, but any type of services that community members need to support them in accessing and sustaining housing. And so, that really isn't something there, an open area where the tribes have a lot of discretion on what types of services they're going to provide and fund under the Indian Housing Block Grant. Do I have any questions regarding the Indian Housing Block Grant? I have a couple of questions. I'd like to know, for those of you that are working as advocates right now, what types of housing are available in your community for victims? What types of housing are you able to access when your victims need housing? most of the tribes and TDHAs that I work with, the significant amount of housing stock would be either the low rent or mutual help units. But over the past few years, we have had several tribes that have developed permanent supportive housing projects, and a couple of tribes that have developed emergency housing for victims of domestic abuse. Later on in the presentation, I will provide information on some of the tribes that I've worked with that have developed those types of housing. With that, we'll go to the next slide. So, as I'm sure many of you have heard of, this year, actually at the end of 2020, the federal government started appropriating a significant amount of money to assist in developing housing and addressing issues that have come about since COVID-19 hit. As we know that this has, for one thing, I know increased the rates of domestic violence throughout the country and in our tribal communities. And so there's this Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. This is Public Law 116-260 was enacted December 27th, 2020. With this Appropriations Act, the tribes received a significant boost in their Indian Housing Block Grant funding, in Indian Community Development Block Grant funding, and Indian Community Block Grant Imminent Threat funding. And this funding on the Indian Housing Block Grant side and the ICDBG side, there's a portion that was allocated under the formula program, and then additional funding that was allocated on a competitive in competitive programs. And this significantly increased the amount of money that the tribes and TDHEs have accessible to develop housing and offer housing services and programs. And so if you are not working with an Indian Housing Block Grant recipient or a tribe, and you have you have a neighboring tribe or tribes in your area, and that I would encourage you to reach out to those tribes and talk about what they're doing with this funding that they have access to, and informing them on the needs of your victims that you're working with within the community. The next one here is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. This is administered by the Department of Treasury, and I'm going to provide additional information on that in the next slide. Please go to the next slide. So with this Emergency Rental Assistance Program, tribes have the opportunity to provide assistance for rent, not only rent that is due over the next 6 months or forward, but rental arrears, utilities and home energy costs, utilities and home energy costs arrears, and other expenses related to housing incurred due directly or indirectly to the novel coronavirus disease. The next slide, please. At this moment, I'm just going to pause. And I hope that someone will answer this in chat for those of you that are working with victims at this time. Do you have access to emergency rental assistance for your clients? And I wanted to let you know that several tribes have received a significant amount of money in this through this emergency rental assistance program. And some of that funding is, for many tribes, that funding is more than they receive in their Indian Housing Block Grant. And so tribes throughout the nation have opened up some tribes, I should say, have opened up their emergency rental assistance program to provide assistance through Native Americans throughout the country. So traditionally, and for many years, most tribes would provide services, housing services and other services to only their enrolled tribal members within their tribal communities. With this funding, tribes are assisting natives enrolled with other tribes and also outside of their communities, so throughout the nation. Christine mentioned our problem here is that so many people have burnt their bridges with our housing assistance. So Christine, at this point, I'm going to encourage you to reach out to the tribes where the people are you referring to the people, your clients in Fairbanks? So would they work with the Regional Housing Authority in Fairbanks? And maybe they've run into issues with that Regional Housing Authority. And I know there are some, many actually housing authorities in the past that had policies that if someone owed the housing authority money, they could not receive assistance from the housing authority. If they had, basically done so much damage to a home, or for some reason, like you said, burnt their bridges with the housing assistance. The housing authority here does rental to elders. Okay. And so with this American Rescue Plan funding, with some of the other funding, tribes are developing new programs where they may not have those restrictions on individuals that would qualify. So IRHA Housing Authority only services rental assistance to elders. And so here's another issue that there are tribes that prior to the Treasury Emergency Rental Assistance Program utilized Indian Housing Block Grant funding to provide emergency rental assistance. And they have emergency rental assistance programs that are funded through their Indian Housing Block Grant Program. Now, most of the tribes throughout the nation, and I'm not sure about IRHA, but I would encourage you to look into it, have developed a separate emergency rental assistance program that they're using the Treasury funds in. And so they have different policies that apply to that emergency rental assistance program. And I hope that you may have an opportunity to assist some of your clients in accessing this Treasury Emergency Rental Assistance Program, because the thing is, if due to COVID, there's a family, an individual, a victim that has been behind on rent, and even if it's owed to the IRHA, it is an eligible activity for for Indian housing authorities to use the Treasury funding to pay those arrears to the Indian Housing Authority, which could help alleviate some of that financial burden that individuals have. Now, anything prior to COVID, then we can't resolve that issue. But as I mentioned, with the Treasury Emergency Rental Assistance Program, your regional housing association might have different eligibility requirements than they were using with their Indian Housing Block Grant Assisted Program for emergency rental assistance. Does anybody have any other questions? And at NEIHC, we recently sent a survey out to all of our members, asking them if they're providing emergency rental assistance in their communities and what type of assistance they are providing through this Treasury program. And at some point, we're hoping to be able to share data and information. And we do have several tribes that have shared their emergency rental assistance program policies with us. Any other questions or comments on emergency rental assistance? If not, let's talk about the Treasury's Housing Assistance Fund money that is just being allocated to tribes. Tribes that were interested in receiving this funding needed to submit requests to receive payments by today, September 30th. And this is funding for tribes and TDHEs to provide housing assistance for tribal members. And this also is allocated on these using the same formula that they use for the NAHASDA allocations. Move to the next slide, please. With this homeowners assistance fund, the allowable uses are mortgage payment assistance, financial assistance to allow a homeowner to reinstate a mortgage or to pay other housing related costs related to a period of forbearance, delinquency, or default, mortgage principal reduction, including any second mortgages provided by a nonprofit or government entity, facilitating mortgage interest rate reductions. Next slide, please. Payment assistance for homeowners' utilities, including electric, gas, home energy, and water. Homeowners' internet service, including broadband internet access service. Homeowners' insurance, flood insurance, and mortgage insurance. Homeowners association fees or liens, condominium association fees or common charges, down payment assistance loans provided by nonprofit or government entities. The use here is intended to assist with repayment of prior down payment loans, not intended to assist aspiring homeowners. So this assistance is intended to assist families in staying in their homes and making payments on in any areas where they're past due. The next screen, please. So also includes payment assistance for delinquent property taxes to prevent homeowner tax foreclosure, measures to prevent homeowner displacement, such as home repairs, maintain the habitability of the home, or assistance to enable households to receive clear title to their properties. So repairs to maintain the habitability of the home. I know that in different tribal communities that several homes are in need of significant repairs just to bring them up to safety standards and health standards. Also includes funding for counseling or educational efforts by housing counseling agencies. Next slide, please. This also includes the reimbursement of funds for entities that have dispersed funds on qualified expenses. And that would include a tribe or tribally designated housing entity, planning, community engagement, needs assessments, and administrative expenses. Next slide, please. The Homeowner Assistance Fund allowable uses. There's a couple of additional comments here I want to provide. The Homeowners Assistance Fund recipient must be a current homeowner in distress. For homeowner-related costs that are not covered by HAF, Treasury recommends that TDHEs and tribes consider whether other ARPA funds distributed to tribes could cover some needs. For activities that are not clearly listed as eligible, we recommend that your tribe add it to your HAF plan for consideration by Treasury. And activities that are identified as measures to prevent homeowner displacement will be carefully assessed before approval in HAF plans. So tribes were required to submit a request for funds by the end of close of business today in order to receive this funding. And then they will have access to 10% of their funding to develop a plan for expending the funding. So that's why it's very important if you have clients that are in need of this type of assistance that you reach out to the tribe or the TDHE and ask whether or not they've applied for the Treasury's Homeowners Assistance Funding, Emergency Rental Assistance Funding. So these are both Treasury programs, not the Indian Housing Block Grant programs. And if they have, ask if they're conducting community meetings on implementing those programs. And if you could have an opportunity to provide information on the needs or be involved in conducting a needs assessment and assisting them to develop their plans. Any questions on the Treasury funding that is available for tribes to assist? Okay, we'll go to the next slide, please. Here we're into the area where I've got a couple of examples we're going to take a look at. And first one here is a project in Portland. And so this is Our Place in the Chinook language, Native American Youth and Family Center, Native American Rehabilitation Association of the Northwest, and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz all work together to develop this housing in Portland, Oregon. It's 59 units of affordable housing in Portland's Cully neighborhood. That is the neighborhood where the Native American Youth and Family Center has an education center for Native American youth and also a recreational center. And the Native American Rehabilitation Association provides services, so advocacy services, supportive services for community members. And if you would like additional information on this housing, this affordable housing opportunity, please visit the link that I have provided in the PowerPoint. Next slide, please. Mini Bimadzuan is an Ojibwe phrase meaning the good life. This is an affordable housing project that is being developed in Minneapolis by the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians, the Native American Rehabilitation Association of the Northwest. And I'm sorry, this Confederated Tribes of Siletz is not involved in this. I thought I deleted that line. That's a carryover from the previous development. This is 110 units of mixed use development in South Minneapolis. RLBC is co-locating its wellness center and Red Lake Nation Embassy on the building's first floor. If you would like additional information on this project, please visit the link. And I am so sorry, I'm going to have to mute for a moment and ask my dog to stop scratching the floor. Oh, the wonders of Zoom. Sorry about that. She's usually a very quiet dog. We'll go to the next screen. This is one of my favorite affordable housing developments that I have visited. Jibaji Mino is an Ojibwe phrase meaning we are all of us together beginning a good life. This is the American Indian Community Housing Organization's 29 units of permanent supportive housing in Duluth. They have the American Indian Center has a 24-hour front desk, offices for tribal partners, rooftop gardens, and art galleries. And they involve the tenants in everything in this building, from creating artwork to gardening to preparing meals. This is a wonderful example of permanent supportive housing for families. And this was a multi-tribal initiative with the tribes in Minnesota, working together with the nonprofit ACO. Next slide, please. ACO also has a emergency domestic violence shelter. It's a place where you are safe, comforted, and sheltered. This 10-bed emergency shelter. Individuals are allowed to stay up to 30 days. Their services include advocacy, information and referral, housing search, financial assistance, legal advocacy, culturally specific programming. And if you're interested in this, please visit the link that I've provided at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. Conifer Estates. This is also a multi-tribal project in Minnesota. And this is in what would be considered a small urban area in Minnesota, so off the reservation in the town of Bemidji. There's 20 units of affordable housing, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. It was a $4.5 million partnership between Red Lake Housing Authority, Leech Lake Housing Authority, and the nonprofit in Bemidji, Minnesota. Next slide, please. And this is Sail River Heights, Makah Self-Determination at Work. And this project, when it was initially developed by Makah, the Tribal Housing Department, the executive director at the time told me that this is a project for what they're calling last chance housing. This is they were and still are allowing tribal members that have run into issues with the housing authority and were banned from receiving housing assistance. This is their second chance, basically, to access housing from the tribal housing program. With this permanent supportive housing project, they provide 21 units, permanent supportive housing. You're looking, the first picture here is the courtyard, but as you can see, everyone is required to enter the supportive housing project through front doors. And then the exit doors for the units and entrance doors for the units are located in the courtyard. And so that they have 24-hour staff that is monitoring people that are coming and going. They also have policies here, where they limit the number of visitors. Individuals are not allowed to use alcohol on premises. And of course, illegal drugs are also not allowed. And this is what they call second chance housing. And like you said, it's for the individuals that have in the past burnt their bridges with housing. And for a very long time, there were and still are limited resources for providing housing in tribal communities. So what some tribes did was they developed policies that at some point made some families and individuals ineligible for housing because of their past experience in tribal housing, but some of the tribes are starting to reverse or change those policies, or developing different types of housing opportunities where they're allowing individuals that have had issues maintaining housing and their responsibilities within to maintain the housing to rejoin a housing program, and providing these supportive services that they need to be successful in sustaining their housing and improving conditions for their family, including healthy lifestyles. The next slide, please. Now we're moving into some of the homeownership opportunities that tribes are providing. And so as you're working with your clients and they get back on, that they're ready to move on into maybe new home ownership opportunities. I just wanted to show a few slides here of options that different tribes have used to provide housing. And this one is Nez Perce Housing Authority in Idaho. Just a picture of some of the housing that homeownership units that the tribe has developed and then in turn sold to their tribal members. Next slide, please. TIWA lending services. So in addition to tribally designated housing entities, there are also Native Community Development financial institutions that assist tribal members in purchasing homes, utilizing several different types of funding resources. Many times they will work with the TDHE or tribe to develop the housing or access other types of funding to develop housing and then utilize those housing units as home ownership opportunities. And they generally also provide credit counseling. Next slide, please. And Bank 2, they in Oklahoma, they provide access to mortgage lending, but also provide financing for tribes to develop housing. And they talk about on this slide, making the point that you can build one home utilizing funding that the tribe has existing funding, or leverage that funding using the 184 leveraging program to build several homes, and so that you can turn those around and house your community members with those. And you can also develop rental housing with the 184 program. The next slide, please. We'll try the next slide. Everything's not coming up there. Oh, there it is. Wait, slow. Okay, this is just an example of what they've done in the Black Mesa subdivision, where they've built. This is planning, and I think this is another point why it's so important for tribes, TDHEs, and advocates to work together on planning development, identifying those needs in your community. What type of housing needs are you seeing? And at this time, I'd like to ask that question. What type of housing needs do your clients have? Do they need emergency housing? Do they need rental housing specifically set aside for victims of gender-based violence? Do they need assistance in paying rent, in making their mortgage payments? What type of housing do your clients need? Maybe I should start with, is there adequate housing available to house your clients? what I hear from the advocates that I've been working with throughout the nation, whether it's in tribal communities or um, in urban areas, that there's a tremendous need for two types of housing: the emergency housing, and then also rental housing, affordable rental housing, a need for subsidies or the subsidies to pay the rent, utilities. Novi, please go to the next slide. At this point, looks like we're at the end of, not at the end, I've got a few action items after this, but I'd certainly like some feedback. What I really want to hear is that as an employee at a national organization that works very closely with the Indian Housing Block Grant recipients, I would like to know what I can do to help advocates access housing and approach your local housing authority. And as I mentioned, at this time, there are tribes that are offering the emergency rental assistance funding program to Indians throughout the nation. And so if your regional housing authority does not have rental assistance available for your clients, please reach out to me, and I can assist you in identifying a tribe that is providing that assistance on a national level. And the same may be true with the Housing Assistance Fund once we start seeing these plans. And there are a couple of tribes that already have their plans in place. But I really would like to assist the advocates in finding housing for their clients. And my contact information is on the last slide. Hanobi, are you going to share the slides with the participants?
We definitely can. And this presentation will be up on our YouTube, so they can also rewatch.
Could you go to the next slide? And so for free technical assistance, all Indian Housing Block Grant recipients are eligible to receive free technical assistance. And we are able to provide technical assistance in all of the areas of eligible activities under the Indian Housing Block Grant, which includes development of housing, development of service programs, and then go to the next slide, and I have the contact information there, so that if, as advocates, you are working with a housing authority and collaborating with them, encourage them to submit a request for technical assistance if needed on planning development, or even we've assisted a couple of tribes in entering into MOUs to collaborate with other departments or organizations on developing housing or providing services, and actually in developing plans for even establishing the MOU or creating a 501c3 or whatever it takes to get the services to the community members that are needed. Please go to the next slide. So for action items, once again, I would really encourage those of you that are not already working with your tribal housing organization, now is the time to reach out to that tribal organization. And even if it's just to ask, what they're doing with the CARES Act funding, the American Rescue Plan funding that the tribe received, and specifically mention the Emergency Rental Assistance Program and the Housing Assistance Fund Program. Share your needs data. Share your needs data with the tribes. Review Indian housing plans and annual performance reports that each Indian housing block grant recipient is required to make their Indian housing plan and annual performance report available to the public. And this will tell you exactly what they're doing with their Indian housing block grant funding. As I mentioned, it's also important to review our housing code and program policies. With this new funding, many tribes have created new programs and new policies for those programs. And hopefully we're able to provide assistance for your clients that so desperately need that assistance, even if with older programs, if they weren't eligible, they might be eligible for new programs. Network, find allies, identify funding sources, and please continue the conversation. If you have any questions for me, looking for any information on tribes and the services that they are providing, I will also provide assistance in reaching out to the tribes, so please contact me. My contact information is on the next slide. Next slide, please. Miguch. I'm going to give you back a half an hour, it looks like.
All right, does anyone have any last minute questions before we wrap up?
You're welcome. I just received a thankful, thank you from Wynette. That's why I said you're welcome. Thank you, Hanobi, for your support. And I look forward to working with you in the future again.
Absolutely. And thank you as well.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right. Before we end the session, I want to let you all know that there will be an eval popping up once Zoom closes. We'd love to hear what you thought. So if you are able to fill that out, we'd very much appreciate it. We'll be sending out a newsletter when we have our next webinar or set of webinars approved. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and will be uploaded onto Redwind's YouTube channel within the next few days. And you can also find previous recordings there. In closing, I'd like to thank our presenter, LindaLee. I'd like to thank our captioner, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope you all stay safe, and I hope to see you all at the next webinar.